Welcome everyone to the Energized Denver Buildings Electrification Code Changes. And I'll start us off here with a little bit of introductions of who's going to present, kind of what our goals are today, kind of make sure that we're also doing our housekeeping. So I'll introduce Katrina Madigan is going to present, and Chuck Bartell and myself, Jeff Terrell, and we work in climate action, resiliency, and sustainability and resiliency, and in the community planning and development is where Chuck is at. So I think I want to make sure that this is a collaboration between our two agencies, and we're working closely on these code changes that affect you and others that you represent. So I think as we go through this, I want to make sure that we're presenting, and we will have about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation. You may ask questions throughout in the chat function, and we will get to the question and answers at the end. And really the goal of this meeting is to make sure that we're getting input about these process changes as we have Denver, our code moves from the municipal code into the Denver building code. And we really want to hope to gain some information of where you as building owners, representatives, engineers are going to struggle, or where you have questions about this. And I think this can really help shape our future of how we do outreach and education and programs for this, for electrifying buildings. And so we'll save questions for the end, but with that, I will kick it off to Katrina Madigan to start us on the Energized Denver requirements.
Thank you so much, Jeff. As Jeff said, I'm Katrina Madigan. I'm the Director of Buildings and Homes for Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I'm here just to give a few minutes of background information for those who don't have all of the history and context on what Energized Denver is, where these requirements came from, before Jeff and Chuck take you into the details. So let's go to the next slide. Starting with the big picture, buildings and homes are responsible together for 64% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. And commercial and multifamily buildings are 49% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. And as a city, we've committed to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And for buildings and homes, we've committed to reach net zero energy for new buildings and homes by 2030, and for existing buildings and homes by 2040. So about a year and a half ago, if we go to the next slide, Denver formed what we called the Energized Denver Task Force. We challenged this group of 25 individuals to work with us to figure out how we can improve health and equity, create jobs, and bring existing commercial and multifamily buildings to net zero energy by 2040. And you can see this was a really diverse group of stakeholders. They worked through all January through August of 2021 last year to reach a consensus set of recommendations that are the Energized Denver ordinance. And you can see we have building owners and managers, our local utility, oil and gas representatives, resident, tenant, nonprofit representatives, labor, workforce training, environment and clean energy, one member of city council. And if you go to the next slide, you can see the principles that they wrote together to drive their work, that they wanted this solution to be equitable and achievable and implementable and effective. And they spent 8 months in task force meetings and side meetings to, if we go to the next slide, to kind of come up with one set of recommendations. And they did community engagement on that. They built on best practices and learnings from other places. And so next slide, you can see what was included and what is part of the Energized Denver ordinance. This is a really high level overview. The first requirement is benchmarking. We'd had this requirement actually in place since 2016. That is annual reporting of energy performance for buildings over 25,000 square feet. That was sort of the foundation for the performance requirements that they recommended and that are in the Energized Denver ordinance that require improvements to energy efficiency or solar. And that's one set of requirements for buildings over 25,000 square feet to reach certain efficiency levels, and then lighting upgrades or solar for buildings between 5,000 and 25,000 square feet. And lastly, the ordinance included, if we go to the yellow box, the electrification requirements, which require partial electrification of space and water heat upon system replacement when cost effective. And this is for all commercial and multifamily buildings covered by the IBC. You can find all the details at denvergov.org/energizedenver. I will also just drop in the chat the link to the ordinance itself as soon as I stop talking. So if you want to read through what the ordinance says, we are going to be making one small update to the Energized Denver ordinance, which is to move the yellow box, which you're going to hear all about today, from a start date for the first set of requirements of electrification from January 1st, 2023 to March 1st, 2023 to align with our building code update so that all the process changes happen at the same time. So you'll hear us reflect that today. We also have a couple other tiny bits of cleanup that we'll go through with that date change. So you'll just hear us reflect that today. So if we go to the next slide, actually I saw one chat come in, so maybe I'll go ahead and answer that. If we go back, a question about what is the IBC? The IBC is the International Building Code, and that is the code, and Chuck can go into this more when we get to him, but that covers all the commercial and multifamily buildings. So that's who are governed or covering under these electrification requirements. So next slide, what does this achieve for our city? This ordinance achieves really high impact climate benefits. Energized Denver will reduce emissions from buildings 80% by 2040. And the electrification requirements also reduce methane emissions. And methane is a really potent greenhouse gas, as many of you are probably aware, which it causes 80 times the amount of climate change as standard carbon dioxide emissions. So by electrifying space and water heat and moving to zero emission electricity, which is coming, we have really high impact climate benefits. And if we go to the next slide, the other really big benefit is improving equity and safety, especially from these electrification requirements, because we know that in 30 to 40% of low-income homes in Denver, gas equipment fails carbon monoxide tests. This whole ordinance is also designed to lower energy bills through energy efficiency and reduce energy burden for the most vulnerable in our community. So with that, I will pass it on. I think I pass it to Chuck. Is that right, Jeff, to review the code changes? Actually, I'll give this short overview. Forgot my last slide. So the electrification requirements, this is what we're going to dive into deeper today, are to require the partial electrification of space and water heat upon system replacement when cost effective. So the first thing that changes in 2023 is just permit process changes to bring near parity in permitting between gas systems and electric systems or heat pumps. That's what we're really going to focus on today, is that first box under 2023. The next phase, just so you know what's coming, is that in 2025, heat pumps will be required upon replacement of easy to electrify equipment. This is the furnaces, rooftop units, individual water heaters when cost effective. And then in 2027, heat pumps will be required upon replacement of hard to electrify equipment like PTAX boilers, central hot water systems when cost effective. All right, so go ahead and I'll pass it to Chuck.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Chuck Bartell. I'm with Community Planning Development. I'm the supervisor of the Mechanical Plumbing Plan Review team, and we specifically review the commercial multifamily projects, which is what the Energized Denver ordinance applies to. So the electrification requirements will not be applied to single family homes, duplexes, or IRC townhomes. Next slide. The code language that's going to be presented here is proposed draft code language that is already, it's supporting the ordinance. So this isn't new language. It didn't go through the standard code adoption process of the tech code committees. It was mandated by ordinance, so it's being brought into the building code. So our community has easier time of finding it, and when they're designing, it's located in one location. So the first item here is when indoor gas-fired warm air furnaces are replaced, they're going to be required to be replaced with no NOx or low NOx equipment, or they need to be a high efficiency or over 90% AFUE. The one exception is for indoor gas-fired makeup air units. Next slide. Partial electrification for space heating. This is, so in 2023, when you're replacing a gas-fired warm air furnace, you'll need to, if you're going to replace it with gas, you'll need to submit 2 of the 3 options here, either electrification feasibility report or provide sizing calculations, or gas pressure test the entire gas system that's serving that building or on that meter. The exceptions are, if this is obviously an emergency replacement, you're not going to be required to submit to us. You'll be able to use the quick permit process as used today. And then this will not apply in 2023. The replacement of gas-fired boilers like for like will still be allowed to be a quick permit or not have to go through plan review. Next slide. And then water heating. So when replacing a gas-fired storage water heater, you'll no longer be able to pull a quick permit for it. You'll need to submit for review, and part of that review will be the electrification retrofit feasibility report, which will be reviewed by CASR, or you can gas pressure test the gas system. And again, this doesn't apply to emergency replacements, and that's defined as replacing one piece of equipment. So it can't be an emergency if we're replacing all the water heaters in an entire apartment building. If you're replacing within one unit, it could be considered an emergency replacement. I did see in the question, Chad, what is defined as partial electrification? And that it's defined as the main source of heat, and then supplemental could be something other than electric. So it could be a gas backup. So whatever the supplemental heat is, it's not required to be gas. The idea is to limit the amount of gas moving forward and have the primary be electric, and ideally heat pump. Next slide. So the main intent of the changes that are coming in 2023 are trying to create parity between permitting or changing from a natural gas-fired furnace to a heat pump versus just replacing a natural gas, because the processes aren't equal right now. So next slide. So the big change in 2023 is most quick permits for natural replacement of natural gas equipment for furnaces and water heaters will have to be submitted for review. And so here's kind of a flow chart. So a natural gas system, if you're replacing equipment with natural gas equipment, you'll need to submit for review, and then you'll need to provide 2 of the 3 items here. And if the equipment's like for like, that's all you'll need to provide is just that. If you're changing the type of equipment or changing the size or capacity, you'll need to submit construction drawings, engineer drawings as you would today. We expect most of these equipment replacements to be able to be reviewed in our 2-day review process. Looking at this, you have the heat pump construction process or submittal process, and you can see it's very similar to the natural gas system replacement. So you'll submit for review, you'll submit engineer drawings, mechanical, electrical, and most of them should be able to be permitted in the 2-day review time if the valuation's under 500,000. And then if it needs to be submitted, it will most likely be a 2-week review time as our intermediate commercial log. The city of Denver has recognized that this is going to be an increase of workload on the review staff, and there's been a couple mechanical positions and an electrical position that's been budgeted to help with the additional workload. And at this time, I'll pass it over to Jeff, who'll be able to talk about some of the incentives available.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Katrina. I'm Jeff Terrell. I'm the Renewable Heating and Cooling Manager within the Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resilience team. And I'm going to go through most of the programs we're going to set up for city support to make these actually to help the contractors, the building owners, and others through this process. So kind of building off of what Chuck just presented, I think it's important to start talking about some places where we are going to start inserting assistance, and that assistance may be through electrification feasibility reports. We'll be standing up the templates very soon and rolling those out. We'll be doing an electrification feasibility report rebate to help with the cost of filling out those. And the main reason for that is that as our starting point, before we even have people come in for the permit, is the ideal location. We want building owners and their contractors to really know, is it feasible up front, and how much is the cost? What are the steps that need to be taken to actually put in heat pump technology before it becomes an emergency, before it becomes something that you have to rush? So I think that's our first step. And then we'll be standing up electrification incentives and an application process for that. And we're running pilots here very soon. I'll talk more about those here in a moment to actually understand how that works and how we can actually best serve the community. And we'll also be setting up facilitation and really what is the one-stop shop for our contractors, for our building owners. How do you understand how to get through the process? This facilitation is primarily for our under-resourced buildings. When you see URB, that's under-resourced building. And like it says, design, financing, applications. There's a lot of work that goes into this shift. And lastly, we'll be doing more monitoring and evaluation. So I think that's a key important aspect to our program, is to say that we're going to be looking at how does this all work? How can we serve the community better? What are the gaps that we don't have right now? And are there buildings that are in more need than others? So with that, really we're going to be setting up city support. And as Chuck said, bringing on additional staff is one aspect of it. But we know that this is not something that we can just turn loose these requirements and everyone will just jump through them. It's all easy and it's been done before. So to that note, we know we have to stand up programs. The first one is really these electrification feasibility reports. And as I said earlier, template designs, we're coming out with those very soon. We'll be running through those with our pilots as we do those. And we'll be setting up training and educational material this fall and early winter to prepare for that March 1st timeline to implement this code. We have contractors on board already to review the submissions, and our goal is to do about 1,200 of these a year. That's a pretty ambitious goal at this point, considering we haven't done these before, but I think it's achievable with the team that we have. And our first step into this is really piloting. We need to actually work with building owners and their contractors to actually go out and install these products into buildings, show local demonstrations of these and how they work. And we need to start off with, running them through, is it feasible? We need to know what are the costs, what are the barriers to electrification, and then we need to implement these projects throughout this phase. And we're looking at probably total 70 sites over 2 different phases for those easy to electrify first and then the harder to electrify later. So And lastly, we're going to stand up incentives. The lessons we learn out of the feasibility reports and out of the pilots, we hope to have piloted those and run our feasibility reports prior to buildings coming in early next year and needing these incentives. And we would look to do a lot of outreach to the community, outreach to building owners, and stand up these incentives to help with that financial burden for those going through this process. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment, but 50% of this is for our under-resourced buildings. It's really important that we focus on our equity aspects in this program, and that we know that those buildings are going to struggle more than our market rate buildings. And so our programs are set up to really serve that community as much as possible. So a little deeper into the feasibility reports. I think this is one of the things I said, this is where we want it to be our beginning step for this. We want to make sure that we're really helping our building owners and our contractors understand, is it feasible? And within the code language, we talk about this. We want to know what is the cost of the appliance with and without heat pump technology. So we'd be looking for this report to understand what is the cost of a gas system and a electric heat pump system. Also, what's the energy cost of that appliance with and without electric heat pump technology? We want to know what is that incremental increase in cost for moving from gas to electricity. We also want to look at the social cost of carbon dioxide over time. We have a way of actually operationalizing that into our costs. We know that that is an important aspect because we're actually trying to tackle climate change and the carbon dioxide as a part of that. So our first step is really designing these templates, getting out and testing these feasibility reports through our pilots, standing up the educational material and hosting trainings for folks like yourselves. And then lastly, we hope to incentivize and really, for those who need incentives, to actually provide that financial assistance. So this is your first step of the, as Chuck said, if it's your two of three or one of two for the gas water heating, we would like this to be your preferred method to meet code. And pilots and incentives. As we begin these, I think what we're really focusing in on is these systems that are at their end of life. We know there's a lot of people that have just installed or have fully functioning systems today. We're really looking at those things, those easy to electrify systems at first that have 1 to 3 years of life left in them. We want to really focus on those because we know those are the next ones to come through. We want to make sure that half of our funds are going to the under-resourced buildings. And as this kind of capital stack on the side here, we know if we stood up incentives that paid for all of our buildings to electrify, the full cost of it, we would run out of funds from the city's budget pretty quickly. So we would expect that the cost of replacing systems, the actual gas system itself, would be the first amount that the building owners would bring in, and that we would also be looking at the financing options, other utility rebates from Xcel Energy, and our incentives as part of this. And as I said earlier, we're talking about easy to electrify starts in 2023 with pilots starting here in 2022 in this fall and winter, and the hard to electrify pilots starting in 2024. And we're looking at partial and full electric conversion. So this is a little bit of all of the above on these. And with that, we will take your questions from the chat, and we also are taking comments until August 19th, and you may email me directly at jeffterrell@denvergov.org, and I will put my contact into the chat so everyone has it. And I do not have the ability to see the chat, so I will try and pull that up here in a second and see if there's questions directly for me.
I can go ahead and start asking those questions. I think first someone wanted you to say your last name again.
Oh, Jeff Terrell. The second J in Terrell is, or the J in Terrell is silent.
Great. And then we already answered the partial electrification. Next up, we have, would you be so kind as to explain how to calculate cost parity between gas and electricity?
Okay. Yeah, cost parity is going to be a calculation that we'll have in the feasibility report that is all about the difference between that initial cost. We know that heat pump technology can cost more for that initial install because the product costs more. Building upgrades need to be taken into account. And then there's also the cost, because we know gas right now is cheaper than electricity for most of these systems. There will be that incremental cost over time. We'd also need to factor in a building owner could feasibly say they want to put money towards something else. So there's also always that idea of where do you want to put your dollars. So for the investment, for that net present value calculation. And lastly, we would factor in that social cost of carbon dioxide, and that is within our code, and I can put the link in to the chat for that. We have a calculation for, I think it's 2.5% increase per year based upon the social cost of carbon, and I can put that into the chat so you guys can see that calculation. But that we hope to actually have that, all of that into the feasibility report, and it will actually crank out the idea of what was my all-in costs to actually do this. Does that answer the question? I hope.
I think just kind of a quick recap about why we are wanting to switch from natural gas to electric. Katrina, I don't know if you have a quick reiteration of that.
Sure, I can do that. So we are looking to move off of natural gas to electricity for space and water heat because our grid is rapidly decarbonizing. We'll have an 80% renewable grid by 2030. And so the way we can decarbonize our space and water heat that are using gas today is to move to a renewable electricity source for that space and water heat. And heat pumps provide a really good option for how to do that. I will put in the chat a link to our renewable heating and cooling plan that gives a lot of details about how to convert different system types and the costs and the reason why. But there's a really big climate benefit, and it actually increases utilization of our grid because today we are a summer peaking electricity grid. We often get questions about the grid, but we can electrify the vast majority of buildings and still not become a winter peaking electricity grid. And so it's a really good opportunity to actually increase grid utilization and move to a renewable source for space and water heating.
And kind of on that note, what is being done to upgrade our electrical infrastructure?
I can start that, and then I can let Chuck or Jeff chime in if they would like. But as I think I mostly covered this actually in my last answer, but the electric grid in Denver is a summer peaking system. These hot months in July are when currently all the buildings have a peak demand from electricity. And so what we're really looking to do is to use that same electrical capacity that all the buildings have and that our grid has for air conditioning in July, and use that to heat buildings in the winter. And that's why we're talking about partial electrification for existing buildings, because we don't actually need, we've found we don't need a lot of infrastructure upgrades in most buildings or to the grid, especially for the easy to electrify systems, which are the ones that are regulated first to partially electrify. We will be using that electrical capacity that already exists for air conditioning and using that for space and water heating.
And then a follow-up, can we touch on what the Public Utility Commission, what Excel's plans are to be less reliant on fossil fuels, and where, how the electricity grid is powered in Denver?
I can start by taking that one also. Excel Energy is our local utility. They have a plan in place to move to 80% renewable electricity for the grid by 2030 and to be 100% carbon free by 2050. And that plan is not just sort of something they've said they're going to do, it is regulated and approved by the PUC. So they really will be going there. They really will be, they're required to be 80% renewable by 2030.
I can go ahead and drop that link in the chat in just a moment. All right. Are the code sections that Chuck reviewed, do they apply from March 3rd, 2023 to 2025 before electrification replacement kicks in?
Yes, the code sections that are were presented today address only the requirements from the Energized Denver ordinance that go into effect March 1st, 2023, and then for January 1, 2025, there'll be another code update to address the requirements that are going to take place in 2025.
And then if I want to replace a natural gas fired water heater at a warehouse, this new ordinance would apply to that.
Correct. The new ordinance requires us, and so the building department or CPD would, if you're replacing a natural gas water heater in a warehouse, if it was not an emergency replacement, you would then, starting in March 1st, 2023, need to submit that to us and pick one of the two compliance options, either the gas pressure test, or pressure test the gas piping, or provide an electrification feasibility report with your application to replace the water heater.
And then how will the feasibility reports be evaluated? What enforcement or resolution process and time frame? What does that look like if the report is lacking and the building should be electrified under the provisions of the code, but owners claim a lack of cost effectiveness?
Yeah, great question. I think at this current point, as feasibility reports roll out, we are going to be I would call it more of a pass-fail for those building owners. And that as we move into 2025, where we're requiring more of these things to be installed at that point, that's when economic hardship really will kick in. That is how the feasibility report will be used as the main tool to say, is it feasible? Are you eligible for an economic hardship, to actually say, yes, it is not cost effective. And we will have, hopefully by then, a lot more feasibility reports reviewed and a lot more of that analysis and ability to actually say, how will this work? How do these best serve our building owners and our contractors? And right now, we're in the building phase of this program. So I think we need a little bit of time to figure that out. But I do know that it will be pass-fail at first. And I think we'll have a lot of good information, because we'll have pilots and we'll have incentives, and we'll have buildings electrifying. So we'll have some good examples of what did it cost, what is a real cost to do a building like what someone might be presenting, and be able to actually evaluate yes or no, was the data correct or not.
I might also just note that, remember, starting in March 1st of 2023, when these electrification feasibility reports start to be required upon system replacement, we will have incentives for those reports. We will also be creating a template that makes it easy to fill out the report, so that we are guiding our community and helping folks start doing these electrification feasibility reports.
Yeah, and I will put a plug in for the report templates. If anybody wants to review those and look at those, you may certainly email me, or I would love to have others look at these before we start using them. So your feedback is important.
So I think this one, you guys just answered with the electrification feasibility reports, but how do we submit this information? I think that was referring to something about furnaces, if I remember which slide was up at that time.
Yeah, we will be building a submittal process. We have a contractor on board now to design, to review, and to intake those forms, and that will be part of the process. They're also going to be administering the incentives for those. So it will be your one-stop shop to, receive the template itself, to actually get education, and to submit those. And then we will be submitting those and providing those to community planning and development.
And then kind of a follow-up on that, how can building owners find qualified contractors or engineers to perform those feasibility reports and navigate the incentive process?
That is one of our first tasks, is to actually start building that core team of people that can actually go out and do this work. And that will start with the outreach, the education, and then make sure those services are stood up for those buildings. And I think right now you can certainly get energy audits from groups. You can certainly get a lot of the same information from your HVAC contractors, who will know pricing and will know a lot of these things. It's really about what level does each building need, and I think we need to build that cadre of professionals as we go. So, but we will have that on our website and provide that.
And then how many pilot projects do you currently have enrolled?
We have about 30 pilot projects that have identified that they would like to participate. Right now we're still working through the pilot process, and we'll be rolling those out in mid-September, starting with some that I think we need to test, and then building upon those throughout this fall and winter. But I can put our pilot sign up into our chat here, and anyone who's interested can actually sign up their building. So I'll put that up now.
Okay. And can you share some of the monitoring and evaluation indicators that will be used?
Yes, some of the monitoring and evaluation indicators that I see right now are, the numbers that we see coming through, both how many market rate buildings, under-resourced buildings, what type of systems are being installed, what are the costs of systems coming through. I think those are kind of key indicators for us, especially on the feasibility report side. When we get to the pilots themselves, we're going to be looking at really how much energy efficiency did we add to the building, how much cost was estimated for the increase in electricity cost and versus the reality of that. We want to make sure we get some real case studies out there. And I think lastly, we want to see how much time it takes for this, because we know this, for a lot of building owners in a lot of places, time is just as valuable as the product or the money. But there's certainly more.
And are you taking into consideration inflation and supply chain disruptions into these processes?
I think we know that there's supply chain issues. We know that there's some issues out there. I think this is, the programs themselves are designed to help people over those humps and identify those as one of the barriers, because there's supply chain issues. There's having folks that are able to actually do the feasibility reports or to do the installs or maintain. We need to learn this as we go and build that with our building owners and mechanical engineers, contractors. This change is not it has not already happened. So we know it's part of it, and we've already heard that from our contractors on the single family side. But yeah.
I might just add that is why we're phasing in the requirements first by making the permit process changes and requiring the electrification feasibility reports and running pilots and incentives before we actually require that systems move to heat pumps when cost effective starting in 2025. What we've heard from other cities is that the supply of heat pumps and the supply of, just workers and contractors that know how to do this work scales up once requirements are in place. But we want to make sure that we have these couple years to get the market ready and scale that up.
And can you tell us about the penalties if we cannot comply?
At this point, it is, I think it is really not being able to get through the plan review process. That would be, I think, the overall penalty for this is that you would be stuck in plan review and be rerouted to and be told your building, it is feasible to electrify. You need to go back and apply for and plan for a different type of hot water heater or furnace.
Yeah, but that only, the requirement to electrify only takes place in 2025. I mean, starting 2023, it's just the submittal of the feasibility report and those two items, but the requirement for electrification only starts in 2025.
And to clarify, essentially no permits are given in those cases.
Well, in 2025, the ordinance mandates that partial electrification is installed unless you meet, you have an economic hardship or it's emergency replacement. And so it would just be not being able to get through the permit process. It'd be like today, if you had a piece of equipment that didn't meet the minimum efficiency requirements, we wouldn't give you a permit to install that piece of equipment.
All right, then we had a question about converting from steam to electric for building heat and humidification. And about requirements for that.
Well, so if you're currently on steam heat, you'd be able to continue to stay on steam heat. Obviously, if you're wanting to get off steam, then the conversation gets more. Obviously, a natural gas boiler is the typical way it's done today. But, after 2027 and some of the electrification requirements take place, there might need to be more of a conversation how to accomplish that. But currently, you're allowed to, you can stay on it.
That's right. And I would just add that we do have a program for building owners who would like to get off of steam today, because we know steam prices are going up, for a steam to electric conversion incentive program. So there's no requirements to move off steam. But if you're interested, I'll put a link to that program in the chat.
All right, how do these electrification requirements apply to new buildings?
So starting in 2023, they don't. Energized Denver only addresses equipment replacement. So even new systems in existing buildings, this wouldn't apply. This ordinance has a very narrow scope of equipment replacement, because the idea is when items come to the end of life, that's the opportunity to upgrade to electrification. With that said, in the IECC, we're currently in the adoption process of adopting the 2021 International Energy Code. During that process, there are a couple of proposals that were approved to require electrification of hot water and space heat starting in 2024. So in 2024, if it gets approved by council, so that's the if. It's been approved through code committee, but it hasn't been officially approved yet. Starting in 2024, their new buildings would be held to the same standard. But boiler replacements or boilers are the one item that was exempted or not going to be required to go electric starting in 2024 for new buildings.
And then I guess kind of a theoretical question based on your answer is, what are your recommendations for new buildings currently undergoing design and construction, where we need to meet some sort of upcoming design schedule in the next few weeks, and the feasibility report templates that are still being developed? So I guess just in relation to potential new codes for new buildings.
Well, I would say anything that's in design or construction in the immediate future that won't need to comply with these requirements. And so once the building code will be put forward to City Council here in the fall, and then there'll be a 4-month period where you can use either the old code or the new code. But starting in March 1, 2023 is when these new requirements, submittal requirements, which would include an electrification feasibility report, would be a compliance option.
And the one thing I might add, if you're considering a new building that you're building today, electrification won't be required because you'd permit it today under our 2019 Denver Building Code, but all existing buildings will have to meet the energy performance requirements that I mentioned if it's a building over 25,000 square feet. So I'll put a link in the chat again to those energy performance requirements, because we are hearing from a lot of developers that they want to make sure they are designing buildings that can meet those energy use intensity requirements for their building type. It's how much energy the building is allowed to use per square foot by 2030. So I'll put a link to that in the chat. That's probably the thing that you'll want to consider most, as well as just the consideration of you'll need to future-proof your building for these electrification requirements to come. I mean, in 20 years, a new building will need to replace space and water heating equipment, and will be required to consider electrification at this time. So moving to a heat pump that's 200 to 300% efficient can both really future-proof for these electrification requirements and really lower the energy use intensity of a building to set it up for success with the energy performance requirements under Energized Denver.
And then the last question that I have is, will the August 11th session be a repeat or provide additional information?
The August 11th will be a repeat of this. Just want to make sure we have 2 times to make sure that we accommodate schedules. We will be posting this onto our website and also taking comments until the August 19th.
All right, those are all the questions that we have.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone. This was actually really helpful, a lot of really good questions. And thank you, Chuck, thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Lucy, for all of your help answering questions and getting this information out to our community. Really appreciate it. And if anyone thinks of another question or something that you didn't ask, or you were too shy to chat us, please email me your comments or questions, and this will help us in the rollout of these code changes and our processes. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.